This is FSM.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Monday's programme. It's a cold one. It's freezing outside. Brass monkeys and all of that. It's bloody cold, I tell you. It really is. It's Monday, October 29th, 2018. I'm Richie Allen. How ya, I tell you? How ya?
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Well, it's all happening in this part of the world where fracking is concerned. Quadrilla, for the third time recently, has had to suspend fracking activities in the northwest, the only place it is fracking right now, because of another tremor. Tina Rothery, Green Party member, political candidate, Nana, and all-round wonderful woman, is there and will join the programme live this hour, Tina Rothery. And in the second hour, former BBC journalist Tony Gosling, the man that is the verifiable, the only source you need for all things Bilderberg and much more besides. Tony joins me. We won't be talking about Bilderberg. We'll talk about Pittsburgh and what happened there over the weekend. We'll talk about the Brazilian election result, austerity, the budget, heaven forbid. And what else will we talk about? Universal credit. Tony Gosling, top man, joins this programme in the second hour. It is Monday's Richie Allen Show, live on Fab Radio 2, TuneIn Radio, Trigger Warning, .tv, richieallen.co.uk, and many other places as well. How you doing? Yeah, it is cold. It's very cold out. Noticed that this morning. I'm not one who complains of the cold. Went out, as I always do, in the very, very early hours of the morning. It was freezing and you couldn't help but think of those who don't have anywhere to go. People who are homeless and abandoned. And it must be a terrible time for them. And I'm not virtue signalling when I say that. I mean it. It's a dreadful time. And I said this last year and every other year. If you pass somebody, and if you have the price of a cup of coffee or a cup of hot chocolate, give it to them. Buy them the coffee and have a word with that person. Get to know him or her. You'll be surprised at what you might learn. Going to leave that one for a minute. I'm sure it'll come up when I speak with Tony Gosling later on, because Universal Credit is driving people to take to the streets. It is forcing people out on the streets. And this is a fact. Homelessness doubling in this country in the last 12 months alone. We might get into that with Tony. I'm sure we will a bit later on. Hope you're well and you don't mind the fact it's a Monday. Mondays come and Mondays go. I'm going to start off very briefly talking about Brazil. Very briefly, because Tony Gosling will have lots to say about it in hour two. You'll know that the so-called far-right politician, former military man, Jair Bolsonaro, has won victory in Brazil's presidential election. He won just over 55% of the vote against 44.8% by the left-wing Workers' Party. He pledged to fight crime and corruption following a string of scandals in Brazil that led to him receiving massive support. Critics are complaining about him today all over the place, saying that his praise of Brazil's former dictatorship and his comments on race, women and homosexuality mean that he's a bad man. And this lurch to the right is very worrying, people are saying today. Apparently he told a fellow lawmaker in 2015, a woman, he told her apparently that she was too ugly to rape. So people are not happy about that. His supporters think he will bring much needed change to the country. His nickname is Trump of the Tropics. See? This is a nonsense. He's not anti-establishment. Like Trump, he's not going to drain the swamp. He isn't the antidote to corruption and to financial malfeasance. He is not. He is the system wearing a different mask. When will people learn? Eh? It's all too familiar, this story. We've seen it in Italy. We've seen it elsewhere. Oh, finally, we've voted in this right-wing guy, he's going to stand up to Europe. He's going to stand up to the banks. No, he won't. Ever. More on this with Tony Gosling later on. Mention fracking. The only active shale gas site is in Little Plumpton in Lancashire, just up the road. And they've had to stop fracking for a third time because of another tremor. This time registering, dear listener, 1.1 on the Richter scale. And that's the strongest one since the work began 2 weeks ago. So fracking has been suspended again. Quadrilla said Monday's tremor was no cause for concern. But just to alleviate your fears and just to show that we're lovely people and we are not maniacal, lunatic people destroying the environment, wrecking the land and causing earthquakes, just so that you won't think that, we'll suspend it for 18 hours. Lunacy. Tina Rothery on that, on this programme, in about 20 minutes' time. Here's a story, dear listener. That might sound like something of nothing. Why is Richie not talking about the budget? Why isn't he talking about the budget? Because it's all bullshit. That's why I'm not talking about the budget. And Philip Hammond, who said that austerity is coming to an end and all of that nonsense. Of course it isn't. If you want to see what the key points in the budget are, what the rise in various fuel duties will be, stamp duties, or the lowering of your tax threshold, all that nonsense. If you want to find out more about that, go to bbc.co.uk/news, but do it after the programme. Don't go anywhere. I see you. Sit down. Stay where you are. Let's move on. This is a story, and it sounds like something of nothing, but it's a story that's important. Not for the first time. We've covered this. We spoke about this back in the spring. Is Apu Nahasapima going to be written out of The Simpsons, or is he not going to be written out of The Simpsons? Nobody knows. Last week, a producer, but not a producer on The Simpsons, but a producer who apparently knows people on The Simpsons, a guy called Adi Shankar, said that Apu would be dropped from The Simpsons altogether because he is an offensive stereotype, apparently. But Al Jean, who is an executive producer, has responded on Twitter saying that Adi Shankar doesn't speak for the show. But Al Jean wouldn't confirm or deny that Apu will be written out. Now, apparently, Apu is a offensive Indian stereotype. Yeah. Been a lot of discussion about Apu over the last year since an Indian-American documentarian, well, a comedian, or alleged comedian anyway, a guy called Harry let me pronounce Harry's surname properly. This is very ironic indeed. Harry Kondabolu, I think. He made a documentary called The Problem with Apu, and he said the stereotypical portrayal of Apu meant people made fun of him. God love him. So, Sky News covered this. Everybody covered this today. Here's Sky News talking about Apu Nahasapima and whether or not he will be written out of The Simpsons.
And The Simpsons has announced that it will drop its Indian character Apu following a backlash against alleged racial stereotyping. A producer has claimed that the Quickie Mart owner will be quietly written out of the long-running TV cartoon series, all in an attempt to avoid further controversy.
But then there will be no Indian character at all. So does that not...
Is the thinking better to have no Indian character than one which is so clearly a stereotype?
It's really interesting. We've had so many tweets on this morning.
Yeah.
This is one from Paul Centre. Thank you for tweeting me, Paul. He says, the entire programme is based on racial and social stereotypes. That's what makes it funny. Probably the most inclusive comedy, as everyone is targeted. Ironically, the Indian community will now be excluded. He asks, is that racist? I've had this from Ian as well. He said there were some fantastic episodes surrounding Apu. The one where he was nearly deported and became a US citizen. The one where he and his wife had fertility treatment. With The Simpsons, it's also about the hard-hitting stories, not just the jokes.
I don't know. If The Simpsons hadn't been around for 30 years and The Simpsons launched today, would you have a white man doing the voice of an Indian character?
It's called acting, dear. It's called acting, dear. That guy's name is Neil, by the way. Would you have a white guy? It's called acting. This really cheeses me off, this notion that a straight man or a straight woman shouldn't play a gay character because it's appropriation of sorts and you're taking a role away from the gay man or the gay woman. What about acting? What about acting? Are you not allowed to act to pretend to be something you're not? Anyway, this gets kind of sinister in a few minutes.
Character. And B, would he use that accent? I don't know. The thing is, if when you listen to the voice, it would clearly be to some people quite offensive. In the same way, of course, that groundskeeper Willie's accent will be offensive to some people. There isn't the racial dimension, but yeah, I can kind of see where they're coming from in this.
You do wonder why they couldn't just get an Indian actor in to play Apu. A lot of people...
Because it wouldn't be acting then, dear. And The Simpsons is a satirical programme. It lampoons people, it lampoons cultures, it sends up stereotypes. So an Indian man playing Apu wouldn't make much sense now, would it? Hey.
Yeah, but a lot of people pointing out that shows like Goodness Gracious Me, which...
Yeah, this is madness, of course, and it's not harmless madness. Listen to Hank Azaria. Now, he plays Apu, very gifted actor, this guy, and I think he does about 25 different voices on The Simpsons. Chief Wiggum and Moe and Professor, the Mad Professor, and he does lots of voices anyway. Very good actor. Stephen Colbert interviewed Hank Azaria back in the spring, not recently, back in the spring. And for the time being, Hank Azaria plays Apu. Listen to this exchange. Hank Azaria he's a bit troubled by the fact that people are offended by Apu. He's troubled.
You know, the idea that anybody was young or old, past or present, was bullied or teased based on the character of Apu, it just really makes me sad. It was certainly not my intention. I wanted to spread laughter and joy with this character. And the idea that it's, brought pain and suffering in any way, that it was used to marginalize people, it's upsetting. Genuinely.
What do you think should happen with the character going forward?
Yeah, I've given this a lot of thought, really a lot of thought. And as I say, my eyes have been opened. And I think the most important thing is we have to listen to South Asian people, Indian people in this country, when they talk about what they feel and how they think about this character and what their American experience of it has been. And as you know, in television terms, listening to voices means inclusion in the writer's room. I really want to see Indian, South Asian writers in the room, not in a token way, but genuinely informing whatever new direction this character may take, including how it is voiced or not voiced. I'm perfectly willing and happy to step aside or help transition it into something new. I really hope that's what The Simpsons does, and it not only makes sense, but it just feels like the right thing to do to me.
Wow. Drowning in virtue signaling there. Hank Azaria. The character is a caricature, right? Of an Indian man. A caricature. It's madness. As comics, they're confronting stereotypes. They're lampooning. They're satirizing. Every character on the program is a grotesque stereotype. That's what makes it fucking funny. From Bart's boozy, flirty teacher, Mrs. Krabappel, to the piggish police chief, Wiggum, to groundskeeper Willie and his ridiculous accent. And every time there's an Irish angle, the Irish are portrayed as pissed, drunk that is, and violent. It's funny. That's what caricaturing is. You highlight a idiosyncrasy of something or somebody and you magnify it by 1,000 for the laugh. The southern states are represented by Cletus, the slack-jawed yokel. Are we really allowing some clown demand that the character is removed from The Simpsons and the filmmakers, the producers are just going to do it? Oh yeah, you're offended by it, are you? All right then, well, we'll get rid of Apu or we'll sanitize the character and we'll get an Indian actor to play him. Madness. It's madness, folks. Oxford professor says academic freedom is under threat. Where and why? Well, in the Telegraph newspaper today, he was accused of running a transphobic Twitter account. Again, freedom of speech. A University of Oxford professor said academic freedom is under threat after being accused of running this account. He's Michael Biggs, by the way, an assistant professor of sociology and a fellow of St. Cross College. He's made these comments after a story appeared in the Oxford student newspaper just Friday gone. The story claimed he was using a pseudonymous Twitter account to post offensive transphobic comments. Is the professor using a pseudonym to post transphobic comments, is he? Well, the truth is, of course, somewhat different. The account, called @Mr. Henry Wimbush, is registered to a Yahoo email believed to be connected to Professor Biggs' official Oxford University email address. So it is him. One tweet from the account reads, "Transphobia is a word created by fascists and used by cowards to manipulate morons." Well said, I would have said. Screen grabs of tweets seen by the Telegraph also state that the odd thing about transitioning is that it makes you less attractive. Biggs didn't say explicitly that the account belongs to him. He was approached by the Telegraph for comment, and he did say this on his own website. "It isn't transphobic to discuss the merits of legislation or to debate theories about sex and gender. Dictionary definitions such as woman, adult human female and lesbian, female homosexual are not transphobic, nor is it transphobic to call the convicted rapist Karen White, who was placed in a women's prison, a man." Asked to specifically comment on the university's policy on transphobia and harassment, he pointed to the university's progressive tradition, such as ending the regulation of sub-fusc according to sex. He said he didn't believe that gender identity supersedes sex any more than he believed that Jesus was the Son of God. "Therefore, I oppose any attempt by the university to establish an official doctrine on gender, just as I would oppose the imposition of a single religion or one particular position on Israel-Palestine." And then he says something profound. Lovely use of language here. And you can apply this to anything, to any debate, to any subject. Dear listener, he says, and I quote, "The enforcement of orthodoxy, often disguised as diversity, would destroy the university's very foundation, academic freedom." And that is, of course, what this progressive lunatic brigade wants to do. It wants to enforce orthodoxy. Here is the official position on this subject. You must go with that line. And they dressed it up as diversity or as protecting minorities. Very serious. Just very briefly before we move on, Will Pike is a disabled rights campaigner, and he sometimes appears on Sky News to review the newspaper, so he does. And he was on today, and this issue came up, and have a listen to his take on it. This is Will Pike, disabled campaigner, and I want you to listen very carefully to the choice of language by Will.
This is less about free speech and more about the trans movement and feminism, and it's a very, very sticky subject right now, fraught with language that is designed to trip you up. Personally, I'm finding the whole debate very difficult to follow, but also understand exactly where we're meant to be in terms of the right side of history.
Did you hear that? Because if you didn't hear that, I'm happy to play it again for you. This is extraordinary. I've been writing about this for some time, certainly speaking about it on this programme for many years. Listen to what this is doing to people. Listen to how it's changing them and changing their mindset. Listen to what he says. He's been asked to comment on what the professor said, right? Listen to what he says. It's kind of, I think this is profound and deeply disturbing too.
Which that is designed to trip you up. Personally, I'm finding the whole debate very difficult to follow, but also understand exactly where we're meant to be in terms of the right side of history.
I don't know quite what I'm supposed to think or what I am allowed to say. That's what he just said. This is jaw-dropping. Language that's designed to trip you up, he said, and I'm finding it hard to understand where we're meant to be in terms of the right side of history. In other words, I'll wait for others to legislate and to define what position good and decent folks should take, and then I'll adopt that position, regardless of what I really think. Self-censorship on steroids. He does recover slightly here.
A University of Oxford professor said academic freedom is under threat after being accused of running a transphobic Twitter account. Now, essentially, he may or may not be transphobic, but the degree at which people like this are getting no-platformed in the name of trans rights is scary. The fact that he's a bloke is quite interesting, because a lot of the people who are standing up against this have been women, and they're now being labelled TERFs, which is trans exclusionary radical feminist. This is a derogatory term, and it's designed to make these women feel ostracised, and essentially less empowered.
Yeah, he recovered slightly, but he said earlier, I'm finding it hard to understand where we're meant to be in terms of on the right side of history there. I'm scared about saying anything, you know, in case I get called transphobic or bigoted on Twitter, and maybe in the future I don't get asked to come back on to Sky News. 'Tis a mad world. 24 minutes past the hour. Monday's Richie Allen Show. Very quick break. When we come back, I'll be joined by Tina Rothery. Don't miss this important stuff. Your Richie Allen Show.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever. Forever.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Welcome back indeed. Lots of tweets coming in already. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. 25.5 minutes past the hour. Mentioned at the top of the programme, fracking at the only active shale gas site in the country has been stopped for a third time because of another tremor. And the tremors have been, well, getting larger. This one was 1.1 magnitude. This is Little Plumpton, by the way, in Lancashire, and the strongest since work began at the site 2 weeks ago, right? Quadrilla said that the tremor was no cause for concern. That's what they say. This is really important. I can't emphasise how huge this is for people. Not just here, but no matter where you happen to be in the world, wherever they want to bring this lunacy, you need to be listening to this and you need to understand what's going on. Don't need to introduce Tina Rothery to you. You know who she is. She's an environmental campaigner, politician, member of the Green Party. Great lady. Tina, welcome back to the programme.
Hey Richie, good to be back on.
I tell you, it's mad, right? You are up to your absolute eyes. This has been a crazy couple of weeks, right?
It's been completely mad. You know, we've been at this roadside. I mean, obviously we've been against fracking for 7 years plus now and fighting it in all sorts of ways. But on this particular piece of road between Preston and Blackpool in Lancashire at Little Plumpton on the A583, we've been at this roadside for 22 months every single day. That's like 650 something days. And your days each had a different personality, as they would depending on who was there, what was happening on the site, what were you going to be, you know, what was the mood of the police? Were you going to have a violent police day, violent security guards? Would it be pleasant? Would there be singing and dancing? You know, and who was going to be there and how was the day going to go? But these last 2 weeks, since the 15th of October, when they actually did their very first frack, and you know, in 7 years of holding them back was brilliant. But then when it finally came, and then 3 days later we started the first of what now to date, since the 18th of October to now the 29th, so the 11 days, we've had 27 seismic events. 27 seismic events. Now, the three largest are 2.8s and a 1.1. So although the others were small, in the end, the fact that they happened at all, finally of one thing happened, is that, we've been carrying a sign, and one of our protest signs says, fracking causes earthquakes, and we now call it the matter of fact sign. Because you hold that up now, and where people would shout scaremongering, they're now going, hell, that's actually happening. And we're seeing that residents locally who had formerly tried not to engage and not to look at the bad things, and I think a lot of them just figured either they'd stop or it wouldn't be that bad, are now going, oh my God, I live within 1 mile of where that all happened. What should I do? And I get such distressed messages from the retirement caravan, like mobile home sites, and residents saying, I'm really scared tonight. I'm really scared. What shall I do? And of course, our other issue here is there is no emergency plan. Should a siren sound, no one has a bloody clue what to do. There is no emergency plan.
Now, let me jump in. Let me jump in for a second, because 50 times is not an exaggeration. In the last 4.5 years, this programme has been on air. I've extended an invitation to various experts who are supportive of fracking, and I've contacted Quadrilla and other companies in the United States and asked for a spokesperson, promised them equal time, promised them that I would be fair, but nobody would come on. In the absence of these people, then, this guy Francis Egan, whom I compared yesterday to Comical Ali from the days of the Saddam Hussein government, this guy says, well, I shouldn't take the mickey out of him. He's not here to defend himself. So, right, let's be serious. He says there is no way these earthquakes can do any damage. Structurally, they can't do any damage anywhere. They are very minor events. No problem, full stop. And that this has been borne out in the United States. That's what he says. Go ahead.
Okay, so absolutely. A minor seismic event of like minus 0.5 up to about plus 0.5 would probably not actually make anything blink. We certainly won't notice it physically. It could only impact infrastructure, really. And as it's like 2 kilometres down, well, there's not much down there. The only thing to consider, though, Richie, is that there is one really important piece of infrastructure down there, and that's the well itself. Now, what happened at Priest Hall when they first fracked for the very first time in the UK in 2011, when they caused 50 seismic events then, they overlised the well. So the well lost its integrity. Instead of being a circle that was then embedded into the sides so nothing would leak, it was now overlised and allowed a clear passage of gas to travel from that depth to the surface. So they cannot say that it won't impact anything, because there is the most important thing is there. There's also another thing that happens during even a minor seismic event, is that you displace radon that's all caught up in the geology under there. And when you displace radon, well, that's okay, because radon's only got a 4-day life. So in theory, it won't reach us and we won't die. However, if you have now overlised a well, for instance, and the radon now has a clearer passage to the surface, there is a chance that all sorts of gases and other emissions could come straight back up that well, as could flow back and all sorts of things. So no, they are entirely wrong. And besides, even if it is minor, they have no control. And the thing that they've got at the moment is what they tell us is keeping us safe, is that they install what they call a traffic light system. So the traffic light system says, if during fracking, while they're actually fracturing the shale rock, they drill down and then sideways, and then they send through, water at atomic pressure, infused with silica sand and some chemicals, and it blasts through the shale rock. And then as it cracks open that shale rock, those little bits of silica hold it open and the gas flows back to the surface, along with the flow back, the liquid that went down that has now picked up naturally occurring radioactive material at that depth. So the traffic light system says, if during the fracking process we cause a seismic tremor of 0.5, then we must stop, and we must stop for 18 hours, clear out the flowback fluid, depressurize the well, and do an integrity test. So we know 3 times that's happened, because we've had 2.8s and a 1.1. And the only thing is, of course, what they didn't tell us was it only applies when they're fracking. So what will happen with most of the seismic events is they won't occur at the moment they are fracking. They will occur as what they call a trailing event. So we'll frack at like 11 o'clock, but we won't get the earth tremor from that till about 11:30, 12, something like that. So it will come later. See, if they've already stopped fracking, then they don't have to close down for 18 hours. Isn't it amazing?
That's amazing.
And most of these, so it's the instigation of something that's supposed to protect us by the regulators that says, right, absolutely, this is going to keep you safe. And then once it's in practice, you realize the flaw of it is, but the majority of these seismic events will happen outside the time that they're fracking, and therefore it will not impact their business operations. So quite crazy, really, isn't it?
No.
And traffic light system, it doesn't have and when it reaches X, we stop completely and never start again. So we don't know how hard it's going to have to get for us before they actually ever stop this.
You know, as well as that, when I announced you were coming on earlier, I had a load of messages from people saying, look, when it comes up with Tina that these tremors are, you know, minor and they're inconsequential and all of that, because, you know, obviously it's going to put the devil's advocate side of it to you.
Absolutely.
People said to me, it's ludicrous to be even talking in those terms. Even if it's 0.003, we shouldn't be causing earthquakes, full stop. That's what people are saying, right?
This is my feeling. And see, the point with the 0.5 amount is that the way the Environmental Agency describes it is probably quite helpful, which is they say that is beyond the amount to be expected by fracking. So when you frack the shale, it is natural to cause some tiny seismic signature. There will be a hint because you have shaken the ground at that level, but it should only occur below a 0.5.
Yeah.
So every single thing that happens above a 0.5 is a clear indication that there is an impact beyond just fracking, that they are now impacting faults and all sorts in the area. And what we don't understand, or I suppose maybe we do, but it's terrifying to believe it, is that, you know, UK is actually much more faulted than even the States. We don't think about it because we don't get that many earthquakes, you know, on a big scale. But we are more faulted. And when you start doing something like fracking, this is going to impact those faults, and you're going to set off things that you cannot control. And that's quite terrifying that they're willing to take this chance. You know, it really is Russian roulette at this stage. You know, it's like, look, we're just going to keep on pulling the trigger. We don't think there's any bullets. It'll be fine. But, you know, I was just before we came on air, I was reading a really good site, and it's called DSMOG, DESMOG.co.uk. And that's really worth going to. They do a lot of great research for us, telling us about.
You're just breaking up a little bit there, Tina, just a little bit.
Within this industry.
Right, Tina's breaking up a little bit. I'm going to disconnect there and reconnect very quickly. Sometimes that works. She's on site there, is Tina. She's outdoors and she's on a 4G connection, I think. Let's see, can we get her back? She sounded like a Dalek there for a minute. This is very important stuff. Tina Louise Rothery, Nana, environmental campaigner, spent years opposing the fracking and Quadrilla's plans for fracking in the northwest and everywhere else in the country. Many others like her as well. They've pursued her in the courts. This is an amazing woman, and we've been talking about the fact that there's, as Tina said, there's been more than 25 events in the last couple of weeks. Quadrilla has had to suspend fracking 3 times because they've gone over the threshold 3 times, over the 0.5, this traffic light system Tina was talking about there. We lost you momentarily because you were breaking up there, but I hope the connection is better now. Welcome back. Is she there? No, she's not. She can't hear me. So the only thing to do now is to call her on the old dog and bone. It's going to take me a minute. Major stuff this. I do recall, just as I'm getting Tina on the line there, having a conversation with an academic from Oklahoma State University a couple of years ago. Well, it would have been back in 2014, who said that he believed that ultimately these events would increase in frequency and they would get worse and worse and worse over time, and that they would lead to other things like how did he put it exactly? He said that it would ultimately it would make it easier for leaks for this stuff basically to leak into the land, leak into water supplies locally, and do untold damage there. Bear with me while I get Tina on the line there. I don't want to take a break because I'm going to run out of time very quickly. Right, let me just do this now. And then, right, okay. I'm having to do this live, you know. Right, let's hope we get her on the old mobile there. This is the thing, and of course it's this time of the day, everybody's online. Tina.
Hi there. Is that hi,
yeah,
hi,
it's
love.
me. Yeah, I was waffling away there, trying to ring you while waffling away. Anyway,
oh God,
yeah, you
there's
just
nothing worse.
no, not at all. You broke up a bit there. The connection did get a bit wobbly, and it sounded like you were down one of the wells, to be honest. But you're back.
Actually, I'm on site, so I'm on a campsite.
No, I know you're on site. I've been saying you've been there for
caravan.
years, and it's extraordinary stuff. Here's the question, right? I don't want to not ask you this. Where's Michael Gove on this, the UK Environment Secretary? He's been... the last I've heard of Gove over the weekend was he was talking about fisheries bills after Brexit to retake control of our fisheries, our waterways and all that sort of stuff. Has he got anything to say about these problems that have been encountered by Quadrilla in the last 2 weeks? What's the government line?
No, there is no government line. There's Claire Perry is the one who's carrying
the minister.
The hot potatoes at the moment. So she's the one who's saying, right, well, we're going to push ahead with this. It's perfectly fine. Michael Gove hasn't said a single word, not a single word on this. And we're stunned by the silence of the government and all the departments on the fact that we're now on our 27th tremor. And in 11 days, you know, and that they're still not reacting. And then we find out this week that Claire Perry, who's the minister in charge of approving this, has had private meetings in May with the fracking companies that she didn't declare. And yet on the same day she did that, she had a meeting with wind turbine companies and she declared that. So she kept these meetings with Quadrilla and Third Energy and INEOS totally silent. So she's been reprimanded for that.
And she's never been, Tina.
Been nothing.
As far as I understand, Perry has never been to the site there, has she?
Never visited us, never once. And the same way with our local MP, who's a Conservative, who is just now finally waking up. So on Wednesday, he's going to have a debate in one of the parliamentary chambers about, but not about fracking. The only thing he's comfortable to talk about is that they were looking to do, make planning easier for fracking companies. So he's going to say we shouldn't loosen those planning guidelines, which is somewhat in our favour. But considering he's never spoken, he's never visited our site, he's raised 2 questions in Parliament. And all we can assume then is there is definitely an election on the horizon because suddenly the Conservatives are paying attention. So I think the Conservatives are very fearful. I think there was a big article yesterday in either the Times or the Telegraph that said, you know what, this is going to lose us votes. The fracking issue will lose us votes because there are a great number of Tory MPs, I believe there are 95 in licence areas, who are very distressed about this. So I don't know, we could be on the cusp of, you know, and especially there's an election coming. But beyond that, you know, the only party in this country that is going to pursue fracking is the Conservative Party. So if we do have another election and we end up with a Labour government, well, fracking will be banned instantly. They've made that assurance, they've made that promise publicly, and they've warned shareholders and the companies that this is what they intend to do.
Let me jump in there now, because this is very important. Tina said there, and I was of the understanding that Tina was absolutely spot on, that the Labour Party would commit to banning fracking were they to form the next government. However,
that's right.
The Guardian newspaper, which is a left-leaning paper, and its writers, including the writer Adam Vaughan, who seems to be anti-fracking, he's been writing recently that there's actually a lot of opposition to that from within the Labour Party itself.
There is.
Right?
There is.
So we can't take it as a given that any future Corbyn government would ban fracking. Go ahead.
Because I think the Labour Party is very split. And the fact is, yes, Jeremy Corbyn can say the things that we need to hear. But if he's got the power to hold his position and steer his party and hold it steady, then great. But I don't know that he will have. However, the reason that's not as important as it could be is that the shareholders are the ones we need to scare. We need them all to take their money and get the hell out of this industry. Because if they take the money from the industry will die. It is suffering so badly financially as it is, and it's built on debt. So if the shareholders have now just realized, and I was reading their forum just 2 days ago, that if we have a conservative government for 10 years, they will just about recoup their investment. If we don't have a conservative government for 10 years, there is no hope of recouping their investment. So these guys are panic-stricken. So even the slightest sniff that we might be having an election should hopefully, startle the herd and start an exodus from the investments in this industry.
Isn't it madness?
All along.
Isn't it madness? Isn't it madness? I mean, listeners are sending me tweets. They're asking some brilliant questions. I've had a question from Dennis who says, Richie, where are the UK's geologists on this? You would imagine the academic geologists of the country would be there now wondering what the bloody hell is going on. What possible damage could these earthquakes be doing to the local environment? Is there any geologist interest in this, Tina? Where are they?
Yeah, there's Stephen Heseltine and David Smythe, SMYTH. So if you look up either of them, they're absolutely brilliant, faultless, and they are keeping the truth in the public eye, but they are two lone voices. We fight, and I think you and I have discussed this before, the, aberration that is the academic world, because so much of it was underfunded deliberately by government, so that private funds would be required to maintain the department. So the department's putting out the lies and the nonsense about this industry in trimmed reports designed by the fracking industry to fulfill what they want to say on their agenda. It's just, and I went to, I was invited by academics that I usually fight with to go to Norway last year, and I went, and it was to raise the voice of activists against the academics and say, what you're doing is working against what you should be doing as an academic. As an academic, you are a purveyor of knowledge. If you find things that are valuable and important to people, you should share that knowledge. But what they're doing is, they're being told by an oil or gas company, right, check, say, for instance, the one on the report on how does an earthquake feel that it's caused by fracking. So Richard Davies at Durham University was asked to do this report, and so he did, and he said it feels a bit like a bus going past your house. Whereas if you asked him more in-depth questions, he had all the answers to all the dangers, and I asked why that wasn't in his report, and he said no, the report was only within the confines of how does a fracking-induced earthquake feel on the human body. So all of the other knowledge he gained through that study was eliminated from the end report because he was only allowed to report on that one specific thing. And that's how they do it. It's not that they have to lie, but they have to trim down the truth so you're only hearing tiny ones and not in context. And that's how the academic world does it. And the academics explained, we've got to sit on the fence. And I said that by sitting on the fence, they were actually causing harm, to our movement is trying to send out truth. And they're decrying it because everyone's then saying, why have you not got the academics backing you up? And that's because most of them are paid.
One of the times, one of the times you were on with me, it must be a couple of years ago. I had a tweet from somebody who was very open about working in oil and said that he was very much pro-fracking, and that was fair enough. That was his opinion. And I remember vividly at the time, because we're talking about academics now, and you and I have talked about how in the past oil and gas has used its vast resources to acquire academics and to acquire the approval of academic institutions. But I remember at the time this guy said, and he was very pro-fracking, he said, Richie, now he wasn't referring to you because you've always been a very, very fact-based campaigner. You talk about facts. Yeah. But he said, Richie, there have been anti-fracking people in the past, and they've told lies, like making up stories about gas coming from faucets from taps in kitchens and all of that. And he says that's just patent bull spit, complete nonsense. Is it fair to say that amongst, I don't want to say your kind because I'm your kind. No, I understand. There are people who do that. There are anti-fracking people who do stretch and bend the truth, right?
Well, certainly within the anti-fracking movement in the UK and the US particularly, which is where the problem with the flaming faucets comes about, is they actually do exist in the States, where if you're working off a borehole, then the methane can travel up and reach into your water, and you will get a flaming tap. Now, that is unlikely to happen in the UK because we're mostly off mains, although it's not to say that it won't happen to the various farm properties that do work off boreholes. So because we work off a main system, but, people are at different levels of ability to research as well, and it's much how, we come up with our best possible evaluation based on what knowledge we can, our way of researching. So people will get it wrong. But it doesn't mean that this, that it decries everything they're doing. Certainly within the movement, there are a great deal of, proper academics and researchers, and we have hundreds and hundreds of academics who have signed up to say they support our stance on this and that they agree with our research. There are 1,600 peer-reviewed studies on this subject, and 85% of those advise against fracking. So this is not a fringe movement. And also it's so vast worldwide. It's been stopped in Scotland, Ireland and Wales. And you only have to think logically. If this was great for jobs, great for the economy, and great for local, businesses and things, then why the hell would anyone say no to it? And what did they see that our government is choosing not to? And I think it's what our government saw that they're choosing not to ignore, which is the power and influence of the lobbyists from this industry that are so far entrenched in government that they essentially are the government.
That's the problem.
The government is no longer anything to do with a democracy. It is a system of state that permits industry execs to get in there. The same way you've only got to look like our local council has just given over all its children's services to Virgin Care.
Oh, that's right.
Now, no one feels good about that. But this is because, corporate interests have power in government and we don't. And so they're a preferred supplier. I used to work for Portakabin as a communications officer. And I remember when the Olympics were coming about, that no one was particularly worried whether we'd get the contract because we just would. We just would. And there was no reason for us to. We weren't necessarily better than everyone else, but it was just accepted that we would. And is that because we had the right connection?
The right influence.
And that's not fair play, and certainly not fair play to the public who then don't end up with a decent supplier. We get someone like Virgin Care who are just going to be in it for the money. And that's never the right way to handle children's services. I think that just speaks of everything dangerous you could possibly conceive of.
Absolutely, or prisons, or young offenders institutions.
Exactly.
It's a dreadful thing.
Yeah.
Tina, final question for you. There must be, it's obviously very disconcerting that you've had 27 seismic events in 11 days, 3 of them above the threshold. On the one hand, you want to be, I suppose you could be forgiven for being a little bit happy about that because it's showing people that this is what happens. What do you think is going to happen next now? What do you think the local people will do?
The happiest thing that happened when I was watching the stuff, because we were really bereft, when it first started happening, we were like, shit, that's awful. It's all actually coming true. I don't know why we're shocked. I mean, we knew this would happen. But then I noticed, in the press the next day and on the news that night and all the radio stations, conversation was about the risks of fracking. And that is the first time in 7 years I've heard them talk about anything other than annoying protesters, traffic issues, who we are in this. And it was never meant to be about the protests. It should always have been about the issues with the process itself. But instead, the press was always going, these dangerous people and they're domestic homegrown terrorists and the type of policing we got made it look like we were really bad instead of realizing there's a bunch of mums and grandmas and dads and grandpas all just standing out there going, Jesus, I have to protect the children. This is what I'm here for. This is my obligation. So seeing the news finally talking about the issue itself and the dangers it brings was a true relief. Yes, the earthquakes are vile and the messages from the local scared residents are upsetting. But there is a real relief that we have finally got to the stage where they have to start talking about the truth of this industry and not the myths of it,
Tina, brilliant to have you back on. Thanks.
Thanks always for the platform. Really value it.
My admiration for you and the Nanas and everybody else who's been there for years is genuine. It really is, folks. You can follow Tina on Twitter, by the way. It's at Tina Louise UK. Couldn't be simpler. At Tina Louise UK. Also go to tinalouiseuk.blogspot.co.uk. Obviously, we'll be in touch, and when there's more news, you know you're welcome back on. Thanks, Tina.
Thanks very much, my love. I don't doubt we'll be speaking very soon.
No doubt about it. Cheers, Tina.
Hopefully not from the bottom of some...
Well, hopefully not. You know, we laugh at that, but you never know. Listen, thanks for that, Tina. Tina Louise Rothery, live on the line to us there from Little Plumpton in Lancashire. Hugely important stuff, this. Fracking suspended for a third time by Quadrilla after a quake registered more than 0.5 on the Richter scale. Serious stuff, this. It is serious. Faisal tweets, if Corbyn gets in, I believe it would be a good thing, because it would expose the conflict in the Labour Party over fracking and thereby expose compromised MPs in the party to the public, hopefully get them deselected over something less divisive than anti-Semitism, says Faisal, which is a lie anyway, says Faisal. Thanks so much for that. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. John Kerr tweets, if fracking is so safe, frack under Francis Egan's mansion, says John. It is unbelievable they are fracking on land where most other countries frack out under the sea where no people live. A good film to watch called Voices from the Gas Fields, says John there. Thanks so much for that, John. Keep the tweets coming in. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. 6.5 minutes to the top of the hour. Now, talked yesterday about the shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh on Saturday. Dreadful thing. 11 people were shot on Saturday as they were celebrating a birth there. There is a guy in custody called Robert Bowers. He's a suspected gunman and will appear in court in Pittsburgh today, where presumably he will be charged. Rabbi Jeffrey Myers told journalists today that the FBI is still gathering evidence inside the synagogue, and it might be another week before members were allowed back inside. Terrible thing, of course. We can't imagine it. You can't imagine it. I can't imagine it unless you're caught up in something like that. And what was interesting about this was over the weekend, this identity politics nonsense rears its ugly head again, people blaming people. One of the things that was very interesting was Donald Trump was being blamed for it. Now, I have no time for Donald Trump or any other politician. Trump, the Zionist hitman, of course. He is a hitman of sorts, isn't he, in the US. Trump was blamed for it, and Fox News has a presenter called Steve Hilton, who's not very good. And Hilton chatted with the Israeli ambassador to the United States, a guy called Ron Dermer. And Dermer, the Israeli ambassador to the US, I should say, was quick to defend Trump because the Zionist brigade, or the Zionist brigade, well, they love Donald Trump. This is Israeli ambassador to the US, Ron Dermer.
President Trump is not responsible for the anti-Semitism that has existed really in the United States in an increased fashion over the last couple of decades. You know, in 2014 and 2015, and I say that only because that was before President Trump came into office, over half of the hate crimes against religious groups were hate crimes against Jews. A lot of people don't know that. And I think you have had an increase in hate in recent years. I think that's a product mainly of the rise of social media, where you have a lot of these purveyors of hate that can now go and reach out to other purveyors of hate and spread their poison. I have to tell you something else, Steve. I've been following anti-Semitism and leaders' statements against anti-Semitism for 20, 25 years. I have never heard a statement the likes of which I heard yesterday from President Trump, where he said those who are trying to destroy the Jewish people, we will destroy them. Not only did I hear that statement, Steve, I heard it applauded by all of Trump's supporters at that rally. Now, that should tell people that this is the action of the extremes. It could be neo-Nazis on the right. It could be militant Islamists on the left. It could be all sorts of people in between. Anti-Semitism is not a product of one side of the political spectrum. It has not been thus throughout history. You know, in Europe, there are waves of anti-Semitism that have been going on now for many, many years. There have been attacks on Jews in Paris, in Brussels, and in other places around the world. And I think to pin this all at the foot of President Trump is wrong.
Ron Dermer there, given free rein on Fox News, not challenged, not questioned once by the presenter. I wonder why there was such animosity towards Jews in 2014, 2015. What was going on then? Now you see, that's a dangerous avenue, isn't it? It's a dangerous segue that. Of course, I'm not saying for a minute that it's right to criticise or to blame Jews for the crimes of the Zionist state of Israel. It isn't. Of course it isn't. But in the absence of any justice, people do what people do. And some people will post stuff on the internet about Jews. They will blame Jews. They will blame Jews for Operation Protective Edge, which saw 2,000 Palestinians murdered in the concentration camp that is Gaza. 500 children blown to pieces. Unrecognisable, some of the children, from the air. And they'd nowhere to run. This was going on, of course. Operation Protective Edge, they called it. And when, in the absence of justice, in the absence of fair play, in the absence of decency and humanity, some less intelligent people look at the Jews. Well, it's the Jews. Of course it's not. Jews in Pittsburgh, Jews in Nottingham, Jews in Waterford City, Jews in Dublin are not to blame for the crimes of the maniacal apartheid state of Israel. But in the absence of any, as I said, justice, any restitution for the innocent victims in Palestine, some people will go online and they will say things about Jews. It's what happens. There's no rise in anti-Semitism anywhere. Netanyahu's been tweeting about this today, the Israeli Prime Minister. Ironically, of course, they don't have any sense of irony, these people. Netanyahu has got more in common with the shooter, if this guy, in fact, did it, this guy they've arrested for it, whose name is, what's his name again? Robert, what's the guy's name again? The name's gone straight out of my head now. The guy that they've arrested for it, who's going to court today, Robert Bowers. Ironically, Netanyahu's got more in common with him than he does with actual Jews around the world. Most Jews can't stand, well, the ones I know anyway, can't stand Netanyahu. Most Jews I know, and I know a few, are absolutely opposed to the policies of the Israeli government. I know quite a few anti-Zionist Jews. I've had some of them on the programme over the last couple of years. Crazy times. And I'm going to leave you, well, I'm not going to leave you, I'm going to be speaking with Tony Gosling in a couple of minutes' time. I'm going to end this section or segment of the programme by talking about a story that's all over the place in the last couple of hours. And it's a story with multiple facets to it. And it's about blackface. And blackface is when somebody who isn't black wears makeup or face paint to blacken their face in order to look like a black person. Famous black person or a famous historical person. And all the tabloids in the UK are covering this story today. It's a video of a man who was on the tube in London, the underground in London, and he was going to a fancy dress party, presumably a Halloween one. Halloween is Wednesday, is it? 2 days away. And he was dressed like Samuel L. Jackson's character from Pulp Fiction. So he had the black suit on, and he had the curly hair. That Samuel L. Jackson had, the curly hair, the wet look hair. And he put some makeup on his face. And what's interesting about this, at least I find it interesting anyway, is that he was accosted by a young black woman, apparently a model, who's 22 years old. And she accosted him on the tube and questioned whether he had the right to or should be blackening his face and dressing up like Samuel L. Jackson, or attempting to anyway. And she videoed this. She filmed it without getting the guy's consent. She then put it onto social media in a, I don't know what you would call it, a absolute theatre, a show of virtue signalling. She decided this guy was wrong to be dressed like this and to be blackening his face. So she accosted him. She accused him of being racist. She filmed it and put it on social media. She said she saw a disgusting disrespect of blackface shown from this guy. This is racist and all this sort of stuff. These are the crazy times we're living in now. Rather than sit down with the guy and ask him, listen, why did you put that costume on? Why have you put presumably shoe polish, whatever he's used, on your face? I don't think it's the right thing to do. Why did you do it? No, today's young person screams at the guy that he's a racist, videos him, and then without his consent puts it on social media. All sorts of privacy issues there that nobody wants to get into. You're not supposed to blacken your face. Now, I've never blackened my face. I've never been to a fancy dress party. I don't know what I would go as if I did go to a fancy dress party. Probably the Jolly Green Giant. I would probably put green paint on my face. Presumably somebody would have a meltdown about that. Is it disrespectful? Are you, as a white person or, I don't know, an Asian person or an Oriental person, are you prohibited from going to a fancy dress party dressed as Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or, I don't know, if you wanted to go as Angela Davis, maybe, why not? Rosa Parks, maybe, if you wanted to go a historical figure. Are you racist if you use some makeup to darken the colour of your skin? Is that right? Crazy. All sorts of issues there. I've decided that something is racist, therefore you can't do it. I'm not going to engage you like a human being on a human level. I'm going to call you a racist, film you, and without your consent, put you on social media. You're now in the national newspapers, and the Daily Mail is actually appealing for people to give them the name of the Bulgarian man dressed as Samuel L. Jackson. Now, I know there are black listeners listening to this programme because they get in touch every now and then. Is it racist, is it? If I decide to go to a fancy dress party on Wednesday dressed as Phil Lynott, legendary Irish musician, brilliant frontman of Thin Lizzy, if I get the wig and if I get the 70s clobber and the silk shirt and the leather jacket, and if I borrow somebody's bass, can I not put a little bit of makeup on my face to darken my skin tone? Or if I do that, am I racist? Really? Racist? Racist is somebody who genuinely believes to their core that somebody of a different ethnicity isn't as worthwhile as them. A racist thinks that some other ethnic people are less important, are less intelligent, are less worthy. That's what a racist is. Somebody who genuinely believes that another group of people are not as worthy of life, are not as entitled to, I don't want to say to life, but is entitled to success, liberty, as they are. That's a genuine racist, right? Am I a racist then if I dress up as Phil Lynott? The world is mad, folks. And I know it's a cliche to say the world is mad, but the world is mad. I want to hear from my black listeners on that. If I was to dress up as Phil Lynott, use a bit of makeup to make my skin darker, would I be a racist?
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever. Forever.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today.
Welcome back to the programme. I've just heard from Tony Gosling. The man will be with me in a couple of minutes' time. Top man, loads to talk about. I am a bit scattered. Somebody sent me a tweet there, a message, a private message. Says, you're a bit scattered today, Rich. You're a bit scatty today. I am. I've lost the power of speech. My vocabulary has deserted me. Doesn't often happen that, but yeah, there's all sorts of mad things going on. I've got new software running on the computer. So as I'm speaking with you, it's very uncommon for me to do this, but my eyes are elsewhere. I'm not looking straight ahead. I'm looking to the right and to the left of me because I'm running new software and it's been a bit temperamental today. So there you go. So yes, I haven't temporarily lost the power of speech. I haven't forgotten my vocabulary. Just a little bit scatty. But I'm focused on the job at hand. It's a Monday. Andy tweets, Richie, surely it's a measure of respect if you dress up as any other person, black or otherwise. Yes, but some black people say, maybe not all, I don't know. I don't know if there is a unified position amongst black men and women. I don't know. This is why I asked the question. Right? I don't know if there is one opinion. Some black people will tell you, well, you can dress up as Michael Jordan if you want, get the jersey, the number 23 Chicago Bulls, but don't blacken your face because that's racist, because of the connotations of it, the minstrels and everything else. And I'm not dismissive of that. I just don't know. I wouldn't go as a black person to a fancy dress party. I don't know what I would go as. Probably go as some obscure Irish former soap TV television personality, probably, just to wind people up so they wouldn't know who I was. I don't think I would go as a black person. Right? What do you think? 8.5 minutes past the hour. Loads to talk about with Tony Gosling. He'll be with me in about 90 seconds' time. Keep the tweets coming in. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. At Richie Allen Show on Twitter. Now, Mwinga has answered. Thanks, Mwinga. Appreciate this. As a black person, Richie, I'd feel uncomfortable if I saw this, Blackface. I don't recognise the celeb that you were trying to be, but I don't mind it overall, personally speaking, says Mwinga. Is that right? So you're saying you would be a bit uncomfortable. So if I was to dress up as Phil Lynott, and Philip Lynott, some people say Philip Lynott, Philip Lynott of Thin Lizzy, and if I was to borrow some makeup from Caroline and try and make myself, my skin darker, you'd be a bit uncomfortable with it. Fair enough. I'm not saying there's any right or wrong answer here. I just don't believe that it's right to call somebody racist for doing it. For the newspapers to put this man in the public without his consent, for this woman, this young black woman, this model, very pretty woman, to take a video of this man, to call him racist and put it out there, and for the guy to be in the national media, for me, it's a gross invasion of his privacy, number one. And how does anybody know that he's racist? Because he's dressed up as, is it Jules? Is that the character's name? Is it Jules from Pulp Fiction? I remember Vincent Vega, was it? I remember Marcellus Wallace was played by Ving Rhames. Great film, that. So he likes the film. He dresses up as the character Jules and he puts some black makeup on. Is he racist? How can you make that determination? I certainly can't. Anyway, I'm going to shut up and get on with the rest of the programme. Tony Gosling is a brilliant journalist. Presents the politics show for BCFM. It airs on Fridays. It is a must listen. I first came across Tony many years ago when I was making radio programmes in Spain, and he came on my shows to regale me with brilliant stories of his own time working at the BBC, but also to educate me and my listeners about the Bilderberg Group and much more besides. Great guy. It's always brilliant to have him on the programme. Tony Gosling, thanks for coming on again. How are you, Tone?
Richie, I'd just like to tell you that you have finally been invited to join the Bilderberg Group.
Have I? Oh, Tony, please. I'm going up in the world. Do you know, I would say yes in a heartbeat, Tony. I'd sell out in a heartbeat. I'd be there first thing. First guy. Somebody said that to me before, Richie, if they gave you money to shut up, would you take it? And I always say, yes, I would. Of course I wouldn't, but I always say, yes, I would.
You take the money and then not shut up.
And then not shut up. That's it. Take the money and pay for your endeavours and not shut up.
Exactly.
Great to have you back on, Tony. Here's a quick question out of left field before we talk about the Brazilian election. If you said to me, Richie, come down to Bristol tomorrow, Wednesday, because we're going to a fancy dress party, and I want you to dress up. And if I decided to dress up as Phil Lynott, the legendary bass player from Thin Lizzy, I'm frontman, of course, great guy. And if I was to put the leather jacket on Tony and the bass and the 70s gear and the platform shoes and all of that, if I was to use a bit of makeup to darken my countenance, would that be racist, Tony? And it's not a trick question. I don't know the right answer to this. We're talking about it today in the first hour. Blackface, is it racist or is it people getting hysterical about nothing, really?
Well, first of all, I'd say tomorrow's Tuesday, not Wednesday.
Yeah, of course it is. That's right, Jack.
But well, it depends. I guess it depends how it's done. You know, the black and white minstrels, the whole sort of gollywog thing, Robertson's Jam, you know, this whole characterising of Afro-Caribbeans as this kind of strange, curly-haired, that I think is racist. I think you've got to be, there is definitely, a way of doing that, which is, so it's just a sort of way of, I suppose, taking the mickey out of someone because of they look different. Now, I think that's totally wrong. But having said that, I've seen the picture you'd spoken about of the guy on the tube.
Yeah, young guy.
I looked at it and I retweeted it. I retweeted one word here, and that's provocation. I see lots of this, and another thing I would say is rather similar. Is this whole Pussy Riot thing? Is where you go into a church and you do something that you shouldn't do just to get a reaction. Now, there seems to be quite a lot of this around, and I don't think it's really quite the same as just genuine freedom of expression. I think if someone, it almost depends on, it's a little bit like if you tell a joke about somebody, sometimes you can do it in a mean and cruel way, and other times you can do it in a kind way. In fact, even by satirizing some rich and powerful person, you can do that in a demeaning and really disgusting way, or you can do it in a genuinely humorous way. Like, for example, a similar thing is where you're doing some sort of comedy turn and you're swearing a lot, and there's elderly people and children around, and you don't necessarily have to be swearing to make that joke. So I think it's just a provocation. It's a way of getting publicity and attention to something. Certainly, it's not the sort of thing I would, as an editor, report. I wouldn't say it was worthy of being reported, because that, I think, is the original object of an act like this. Someone doing something like this is to get attention for themselves, and the press seems to just run along on their coattails, where actually there's a fantastic amount, as you and I know, that they will not talk about.
Of course, much more important things. You're absolutely right, Tony. Listen, you might be right about the provocation aspect of it, but if he's not being provocative, there are so many issues here. Issue number one is, if he's being provocative, well, he's a bit of an arse. If he loves Pulp Fiction and he loves the character of Jules, pretty cool character, he's got some great lines in the film, and he's just doing it, he's not really racist. Then I'll tell you, there's another issue just before we talk about Brazil and obviously austerity here, and we're going to talk about universal credit, very important, as you said, much more important issues. There's a privacy issue as well, Tony. We have people these days, when they see something they don't like, try to basically, this young woman, this young model, maybe she is genuinely offended by the guy. But is it the right thing to do to film people and put them on social media without their consent? I mean, the guy's in the national newspapers now. I can't imagine that's what he wanted, for his face to be out there and to be accused of racism. Are there privacy issues here? Seems that a lot of people are doing this now, filming something they don't like. And go on.
Listen, you're in public. There is no privacy issue. If you're out there in public, any Anyone has got a right to take a photograph of you. I mean, London Underground might have an issue with it, as it's their property. But if you're in public and you're displaying yourself in front of the public, and someone takes a photograph of you, well, fair play to anybody. In fact, I would even say that if you're in a public space and somebody is in their own home but have got the windows wide open and are sort of facing out towards you, if you take a photograph into their house, then that's also something that you can see from the public space, and therefore that's also not an invasion of privacy if you take a photograph and then
publishing without their consent. Tony, we're talking about publishing without somebody's consent. This guy is out for a few drinks and a fancy dress party.
You don't need anybody's consent to publish a picture which is taken in public at all. No way. That's a really draconian type of a system that would start to say, well, this photographer has taken a picture of somebody and in public, and that then in some way they're not allowed to publish it. I mean, that you're starting to go down the road of an authoritarian state. That's the sort of thing you might see a law to protect that sort of privacy. It's not privacy because you're in public, number one. But number two, photographers and journalists need to be able to do their job. You'll find most often photographers will be poking their nose into the grounds or the from the street into the houses of the rich and powerful. We need to be able to continue for them to do that.
You can't see there's a big difference. I think there's a big I'm delighted we finally found something to disagree on, you and me. I think there's a huge difference between politicians, between people, public figures, people that are in the public eye and of the public interest, being chased when they deserve to be chased because they have to be exposed for one reason or another. And a guy who's out on the town and a woman starts videoing him, accuses him of racism, and then puts that on YouTube or Instagram without getting his consent. Tony, I can't phone you up tomorrow and record that conversation without getting your consent, Tony. I can't do that.
That's not in public. You know, if we're having a conversation on the tube and we're shouting and it's easy for people to hear it and someone records it, now hang on, now that actually you're now starting to talk about potentially that might be actionable. But the idea of taking a photograph of somebody in public and putting it online, it's a no-brainer. I do it all the time. And in fact, if I even see someone who's in a situation which is quite comical, I mean, I can remember taking a photograph of some guy who was stood at a till, but he was stood at a very strange angle. You know, he was kind of right. It was like he was leaning on the till with his chest, and he was typing away or something on the till. It was in a shop, and I just thought it was a hilarious picture, and I took a picture of it. Now it might be a little bit cruel to him, but hang on a minute, this is a free country. You take a photograph, you can publish it, for God's sake.
Okay, final word on this, because I think this is very interesting. This is an interesting segue. But won't it ultimately lead to, and again, we're not talking about pictures anymore. We're talking about videos. Won't this ultimately lead to, and this is a generation, of course, this is the millennial generation, or people born just before that, who think it's okay to confront or to, take umbrage with something they don't like and video it and put it online in order so that that person can be chased and harassed and almost hunted. So I would argue what that will lead to, it will lead to, Tony, the imposition of self-censorship. Eventually people will be just terrified to open their mouths, whether they're in public or wherever. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not a good thing, right?
But you know what it might do is it might actually encourage people to put even more outrageous outfits on in order to get some attention and publicity.
Maybe. Look, I'll tell you what. We'll call it a draw. Even though I'm pretty sure my listeners will probably be more inclined to support your argument. I'm sure they will be. Tony Gosling is our guest, folks. Terrific journalist. There aren't too many of them around. If you haven't checked out the Politics Show on BCFM, check it out. Tony, what about this Brazilian president who has been dubbed the Trump of the tropics? This right-wing politician, Jair Bolsonaro, who's allegedly at one time told a woman, a fellow lawmaker, that she was too ugly to rape. He supported the previous militant administration there. Everybody's worried about it, and columnists in the UK today are saying that this lurch to the right all over the world is something to truly fear. What do you think?
Well, first of all, he supported the previous dictatorships in Brazil, which is horrifying. I mean, this is a massive country, of course. By the way, if you go back to the 1950s, you'll find former Nazi war criminals running the Brazilian secret police. So these are the guys he was supporting. So that's what we're looking at here, really, is not a neo-Nazi, but a Nazi, someone who is prepared to employ Nazis in order to torture political dissidents in his country. This is the kind of guy he is. Now, the only reason he's there, and even in with a chance, is because the United States is spending billions on controlling various parts of the world, well, almost all parts of the world, including Britain, and that money goes on influencing elections. What's happened in Brazil over the last few years? First of all, we had Lula, who's a very popular left-wing president, trying his best to try and get a bit of social justice. Now, this is simply by, yes, it means taxing the super rich, and what it means is providing things like social services, schools, education, some decent a bit of healthcare, fixing up the roads, that kind of thing. Lula was really popular, and then he was judicially. I mean, what we're talking about really over there is the judicial coup. Now, what you do is you just fix up a bunch of judges who will do what you want, easily bribable, or for whatever reason, maybe blackmailable, into coming up with particular judicial decisions, and then you start to attack the popular leaders, and that's what they've done. Exactly what they've done with Lula. He was jailed, and also Dilma Rousseff, who's the last elected president in Brazil. I noticed, by the way, and this is just me trawling through the old spider webs at the back of my brain somewhere, the last presidential election, whatever it was, 4 or 5 years ago, one of the main candidates, who was a socialist, died in a plane crash. You know, this is what goes on in Brazil. And so Dilma Rousseff, who was the last elected president over there, also from the left-wing party, who was seen very much as the successor to Lula, she was bounced out by the courts halfway through her presidency and told, oh, well, you're totally corrupt, blah, blah. Well, she wasn't corrupt. This is just the courts being misused in order to control who can and can't be president. And so this is why we are where we are. There's been an enormous amount of interference at the very apex. I mean, you know, the top of the pyramid of power in Brazil for the last probably 7, 8, 9, 10 years, really a lot, you know. So they've been the Americans mainly through their organisation Southcom, who take a great deal of interest in who runs all the South American countries. This is called Southern Command, which basically runs South America. At least it's I wouldn't say necessarily, maybe that's exaggerating a little. So, you know, what they do is they massively influence elections. And my colleague Martin Summers on the radio, I mean, he'd looked into this more than me, some of the military aspects of this. Apparently the Brazilian army is now massing on the Venezuelan border, potentially going to invade Venezuela, really effectively just as a kind of puppet for the United States. And that's who this guy is. He's not a populist leader. He's not actually even that popular. He's been put into power really by the media and also by the total erosion of the morale of the left by destroying all of their popular presidents over the last 10, 15 years. So that's really, I think, what's going on in Brazil. And it's a great pity because it's a very important country, particularly, you know, as one of the BRICS nations, so-called independent, trying to forge an independent way away from the IMF, you know, who are basically the financial dictators of the planet. So it's not looking at all good for Brazilians, but it's really the finger of blame must be pointed at the Pentagon, at their unified command structure and the interference that they are doing constantly all over the world, but particularly in this case through Southcom, which is based in Miami. And we hear nothing about Southcom, even though it's one of the most powerful forces in the world, certainly the most powerful force in South America for interfering in national politics.
We're a long way from the days of Hugo Chavez travelling around the continent, meeting the leaders of other countries and winning support for a unity on that continent, you know, a unity against the imperialist policies of the United States. It's not that long ago, Tony, but it feels like eons ago, doesn't it?
It does. And of course, there's a lot of evidence that he was poisoned to death. And that seems pretty clear. There were other poisonings of South American leaders. I think the Americans have decided that they're going to dominate the planet by hook or by crook. And I'm not talking about the American people. I'm talking about the deep state in the United States. Really, they took on the mantle of the Nazis after the Second World War, I suppose for a few decades quietly. Then Kennedy was assassinated. And now we've got the war on terror, which is their sort of wonderful brainchild, although the Brits, of course, were part of that too. That's, I think, what we're having to deal with now is they have become the rogue state that Nazi Germany was in the late 1930s and early 1940s, invading wherever they feel like, interfering in foreign governments, assassinating leaders. Now, the Israelis are guilty of this too. I mean, there's this amazing book, Rise Up and Kill First, which is by Ronan Bergman, which talks about 2,700 assassinations of political leaders, religious leaders, etc., that the Israelis have been, the Secret Service, Israeli Secret Service has been doing over the last 30 years or so. And so this is now how the world is working. I think we've really got to wait. If we haven't woken up to it already, we've got to wake up to it. Is that there is a rogue state system out there, based really, I think, around Israel, US, and UK. But the real muscle, it comes from the United States. The financial muscle, the military muscle, and the projection of power into other parts of the world. The Yanks are mainly behind this, and I'm afraid anybody like Hugo Chavez that is going to come along, in this present era, I think the Americans are so far ahead on this that they will try and bounce them out by whatever means, get them locked up, get them assassinated, have a plane crash or whatever, before someone like that ever gets close to power anymore. And the thing is, I mean, I visited South America a few decades ago, spent a few months there, and I found that the people, ordinary people right across the continent, in all the countries I visited about 5 or 6 countries, are very much aware of the malign influence of the US, and I'm sure they are right now looking at Brazil and saying, well, this is not what Brazil wants, is it? It's what the Pentagon wants.
Well, the schoolyard bully was always a big lumpy fool, and he generally had a smaller guy with him manipulating him. And that's what Israel is. I mean, the Zionist control of the United States is pretty much total. So you're right to talk about the military might and the finance and the muscle of the US, but in terms of strategy, all roads certainly lead to Israel, and this is not anti-Semitism or Israelophobia. It's just a fact, isn't it? I mean, the country's under the complete control of the Zionist lobby and the Zionist government of Israel.
But there is a strong British Israel project in Britain as well as in the US. I mean, but I think what they've done. The Zionists and Freemasons as well. Many of the Freemasons are very much into this whole sort of Zionist idea. And if you go in to look at the Masonic rituals, you'll find a lot of based around the temple in Jerusalem, this kind of thing. So there's this sort of religious fanaticism, fundamentalism around Freemasonry that is also very much mirrors the sorts of ideals that drive a lot of the fundamentalist Israelis. And it's actually quite, many Jewish people I know and I've spoken to are really getting concerned about the direction since the mid-1990s that the Israeli state has taken.
Yeah.
A racist direction, an extremist direction, and also almost relishing the prospect of war, with the Arab world. Now, just a minute, guys, you have almost all of you are Europeans who've migrated down to the Levant, to around sort of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, wherever, into the Israeli state. And you're now saying that you want a war with the indigenous people down there. Now, there's lots and lots of Jews that can see just how dangerous that could be. And, so it's no way anti-Semitic to be looking at that project as potentially explosive, and potentially even seeding a third world war. It's no exaggeration to say that if the Israelis and the Iranians start to kick off against one another, as the Israelis actually have been threatening recently. I noticed, Netanyahu, was it a couple of months ago now, stood outside Dimona, the nuclear place, saying, we could easily attack Iran. What is he playing at? Then that would bring in the Americans almost certainly, because you're going to have the Russians fighting with the Israelis. The Americans would come along, and then quite easily the Chinese could be dragged into that part of the world. They're playing with fire, Richie, and we need to be, I think, putting the finger on the Israelis, 100% the Israeli state. Either you behave, or we're going to kick you out of the United Nations, and we're going to make you a pariah state. Behave, and there's no excuse to be racist just because you're Jewish. No chance.
Tony Gosling is our guest, thisweek.org.uk. Check him out, bilderberg.org. Great man. Top journalist is Tony. Lots to get through. It's 28 and a half minutes to the top of the hour, and there's been a mass of tweets on this. Go to twitter.com, Richie Allen Show, all one word. Press enter and you'll see what people are tweeting me. Loads to talk about. There are those who listen to this programme and they say, guys like me, we spend an inordinate amount of time focusing on Israel and we're obsessed with Israel, and that it can lead to, now I don't agree with this of course, but it has been said, and it's been said a lot today in the UK press and the UK media, that blaming Israel and seeing Israel as being responsible for most of the world's wrongs and injustices can lead occasionally to people getting terrible ideas into their heads and doing things like what happened in Pittsburgh on Saturday, where 11 people were murdered at a synagogue. People were there to celebrate the birth of a new baby into the community. 11 people were killed, and right across the board people are saying, well, this is evidence that anti-Semitism is a real thing and this is what it leads to. What have you made of what happened on Saturday, Tony, and the reporting of it since then?
Well, certainly, I mean, the main thing for me is that this guy appears to be a Native American descent, which is bizarre to think that he is, wading in this direction as anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. I don't quite understand why it might be, but there is obviously an attempt, I think, anyway, to focus on faith and religion as the heart of the problem. And actually the media is guilty of this. For example, just today we've had the International Secular Society's report come out across the world saying that various countries are okay for people who don't believe in God, and other places are not okay. Like obviously Saudi Arabia, you've got to believe in God in Saudi Arabia, and I'd totally be behind them on saying that people should have freedom of conscience. I mean, that's just a basic human right, which doesn't really exist in Saudi Arabia. But the other side of that is that there are people who believe that the faiths themselves are the heart of the problem, and I just think that that's a really dangerous idea. And actually, what happened, of course, I mean, you're Irish yourself. There was a lot of focus on, this is the problem of faith going on in the Troubles, in the Northern Ireland Troubles. It's the Protestants are trying to kill the Catholics. Why can't they just give up any idea of God and everything would be fine? Actually, of course, it was much deeper than that, and it was a struggle between two entire cultures. Many of the people, of course, involved in the actual terrorism had no belief in God. They were part of either a Republican community or a loyalist community, and those people who were involved in the terrorism may have possibly have been going to church, but the chances are they probably weren't. And yet there was always this focus on the Catholics and the Protestants, the Catholics and Protestants. And I think that the press really needs to get its act together to get deeper into these big global conflicts, and particularly with the Israelis. This is not anything to do with ordinary people that go to a synagogue. This is the Israeli state. And when someone like Netanyahu puts on his, we're just doing this for God thing, I think we just need to call him out. It's the same really as Theresa May and Prince Charles talking about God, particularly Theresa May, when she says, I use God to guide me and the Bible to guide me and my faith to guide me. Rubbish. Absolute nonsense. All she's doing is she's trying to whitewash herself, and she's faking it. Basically she's saying, oh, look, here's something good over here, and I'm going to, rub a little bit of goodness on me and everyone will think I'm great. Well, sorry, mate. It just doesn't wash with me. And if the press don't actually call that out, then we're going to get more of these sorts of attacks, I would imagine. I mean, let's also look at some equivalent sort of thing that was going on. I remember looking really, really deeply into attacks on the Coptic Christians in Egypt when around the time of after the Arab Spring, not long after that. And it was quite clear that the government was doing these attacks it was actually the Interior Ministry that was doing the attacks on the Coptic Christian churches, and then trying to use it to say, oh, well, we've got this massive religious conflict problem going on. Actually, no, it was the Interior Ministry. That's the Home Office it would be equivalent of in Britain. So let's just make sure that, we don't jump to conclusions about why this has happened. Obviously, it's an appalling thing to happen to people as they're worshipping on it early on a Saturday morning, and trying to do some proper analysis. But I can't see people like CNN and NBC and the rest of them doing that, I'm afraid.
No, it's cliche. It's rhetoric and cliche. Patricia tweets, this is too funny. She's in Switzerland, by the way. The Israelis are threatening Iran. What country are they looking to for that? Tweets Patricia. Oh, that's right, the good old USA. I would like to know how many Israelis have died in the wars, also known as invasions, so far in the Middle East. Patricia there, thanks for that. Keep the tweets coming in. Tony, homelessness is on the rise in this country. Anybody who lives near one of the major cities and who spends time in their town centres, in their cities, you can't help but notice that it's on the increase. I've lived in this city. It's my second time living here. We've been back here now over 4 years, and we've seen it in Manchester city centre year on year on year. And universal credit, and some of our listeners, depending on where they are in the world, might not know what it is. It's a social welfare payment. It's a system where certain benefits that people would have got staggered maybe in the past over a monthly period have now been rolled into one, and it's led to all sorts of hardship for people. It was predicted that it would do. It's caused all sorts of problems with people who are waiting longer than they were supposed to wait for their payment, and it has resulted in people ending up on the streets and more people going to food banks. Today, as Tony Gosling will know better than me, is the day when the Chancellor of the Exchequer announces his budget for the next year, the fiscal year. Basically, it's the government's outlining its spending plans, what it needs to spend over the next 12 months, but also how it will do that, namely what taxes it will raise or lower and how much borrowing it will do. One of the big lines that's come out of this is this notion that austerity is over. The Prime Minister Theresa May said this at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham a couple of weeks back. And Philip Hammond said this today. Austerity is over, Tony. Is it?
Of course it's not.
No.
What they're doing is they're just maybe reining back a little tiny bit. But look, all I can say is that the system at the moment is every week punishing people, more and more people. I mean, you'd have to just completely abolish universal credit and have some kind of universal basic income, which you don't have to apply for. You just get automatically in order to do anything to stop it. Anybody that's on benefits will know this. And we call them benefits. Actually, what they really are is social security. For those people who've paid their national insurance, this should be a guaranteed payment that's made to them based on the fact that they haven't managed to get any work. And if you can't get work, then you should be guaranteed this payment. And obviously, one of the reasons for many people that they aren't in work is because of the incredible low wages when they do get work. This has been driven down in all sorts of ways by the government, by big business. And what have they done today? I noticed he's given tax breaks, Philip Hammond, for business rate breaks for people on the high street, which sounds great, doesn't it? But why not just give money to the poor so they can spend money on the high street? Then you don't need to give any business tax breaks to the companies. So what they're trying to do is shrink the state. They want no state. They want survival of the fittest. They want the law of the jungle and money to be the only really valuable thing or thing that people use to decide anything in society. And as they shrink the state, of course, they're starting to shrink the possibility of having decent education. They've tried to privatise that through the academy schools, some of which are collapsing, many of which are really poor quality. I mean, you can do, basically, they're run like a company would be, with bully bosses as headmasters and headmistresses, as opposed to the old state sector. So, I mean, austerity, no, it's not gone. And it's really a tool just to beat poor people who don't vote Tory. And, of course, why would the Tories be even vaguely interested in giving any money to people who don't vote for them?
The Labour Party might very well form the next government. And you and I have been mates, and we've been speaking on programmes like this now since 2009, believe it or not, 2010. And problem with the Labour Party is, regardless of whether Jeremy Corbyn is real, whether he's genuine or not, I suspect he's not, but I've been banging this drum forever and ever and ever. We'll never change our lives. We'll never change the paradigm by going to the ballot box and voting for any of these people. Why? Because of the creation of money. The ultimate conspiracy. Who controls the creation of money? What the Labour Party will do, in its wisdom, it will do some of what you suggested. It will try and give money to people who desperately need it to get them back on their feet and get them out spending money in the economy again. But one of the ways it will do that is by borrowing. And see, this is the never-ending death cult. The death cult money system. Fractional reserve banking, right? This is true, right? It's what Labour will do, right?
What happens if the government don't pay the money back? They can just stick two fingers up to the banks if they feel like it.
Yes, but Jeremy Corbyn's not going to do that, Tony.
If the banks are doing what they did in 2008 and pointing a gun to the head of the Prime Minister saying, look, sign here, you need to give us a load of government money, otherwise all our entire financial system is going to go down. If they do that sort of thing, then the government can just simply say to those banks, shrug its shoulders and say, well, sorry, all that money that you wanted back from us, forget it, mate. The government needs to get tough with the
but they won't, Tony. But they won't ever. Can I just put this to you? Let me just put this to you. Tony Gosling is our guest. Folks, top man, great programme. If you haven't heard it before, thisweek.org.uk, the politics show for BCFM. It's a rare treat, that weekly. Check it out. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Listen, Jeremy Corbyn is never going to say this. I had Steve Keane on this programme a few times in the last couple of years. Find him very nice guy, very jovial guy. He's very interested in the policies and the ideas of John McDonnell. And I challenged Steve Keane about the creation of money and capital, fractional reserve banking and central banks and where money really comes from. And he was a bit... he was kind of a little bit reluctant to get involved, but eventually he got involved with me, and he said, Richie, you are right. It is ridiculous for Richie to borrow from the Bank of Richie to pay for Richie's programme of Richie. It's ridiculous. Who do we owe the money to? He acknowledged this to be true. And I said, well, that's a system that ultimately benefits only one person. That is the less than 0.001% of humanity, the super elites, who ultimately, using that system, accrue the real wealth of the world by getting everybody into debt. Steve Keane admitted this. Now, this will never be discussed on Sky News or the BBC or even RT. Jeremy Corbyn, my friend, and I am going to shut up and let you have the floor for as long as you want, is never, no more than JFK did, no more than Roosevelt did, is ever going to take on the banking institutions of the world and tell them to get stuffed. That's my opinion. It ain't ever going to happen. Go ahead.
Well, if they were going to do it, Richie, they wouldn't be saying anything before the election, that's for sure. In fact, this is one of the things that they tried to do over in Greece, and they're trying to do it now in Italy, is to, for the government, the elected government, to actually get a grip on the money system. And in Italy, they've been told, no, you're not going to do it. Yeah. So, but I mean, that you have to be very, very clever about the way you do it. So, in other words, it's got to be a secret. So you're not going to go into an election campaign saying, blah, 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 we're going to do X, Y, and Z. You need to arrive in power and then do it. And I mean that's I think the sort of way that they would do it. They wouldn't necessarily make a big fuss about it before an election. I think they'd be foolish to do so. They would announce a plan B or plan C or whatever it is when the financial crisis hits. Now, quite whether John McDonnell, Steve Keen, other advisors of his have got the nous to do it, and the balls to do it, that I'm not sure. But that's what they need to do. They certainly need to come to grips with the creation of money, the system of creation of money. You're absolutely right about that.
Can I just clarify something, Tone?
Doing it is you just have a reset. That is, in other words, you say, well, this debt is all unpayable. Let's just wipe the slate clean. That's another way to do it. The Jubilee, which is another way of saying it.
Can I get a quick clarification from you? Are you telling me that you think that it's possible that Corbyn and McDonnell might be looking to the near future, privately, secretly, a future where they would take control of the creation of money and the money supply away from how money is created now? And just in case our listeners don't know, this is how money is created now. The government says it needs money to pay for the NHS, to pay for the police, to pay for education. It issues government bonds and treasury bonds, which is a promissory note. And they sell those bonds to the Bank of England and to other stakeholders, pension funds and stuff, who basically give money to the government. But when they do, they create that money out of thin air. It doesn't exist. You actually think there's a possibility that Corbyn and McDonnell will say, right, that is over. No more borrowing from our own bank to pay for our own programmes of government. We're going to take control of the money supply and issue debt-free currency.
And you know why I think they might do that?
Right.
It's because Mervyn King, the former, basically Mark Carney is one of the instigators, the present governor of the Bank of England, one of the instigators of the financial crisis when he was working at the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central banker's central bank in Basel, Switzerland. He was chairing the regulation committee that deregulated, that allowed the financial crisis to happen in 2008, which wasn't a crash. It was a massive bailout by the public of those private banks. But Mervyn King, he's a different character. He was the former Bank of England governor, and he has been constantly warning people. I say constantly. You only hear the odd little squeak from him, but he's saying the same thing each time. He's saying, look, we haven't fixed the problem. We need to be ready for it. We haven't fixed the problem. So there are voices out there, powerful, influential voices who are saying, listen, guys, when this next financial crisis happens, when we get the next 2008, we've got to have a plan ready to deal with it properly, because we didn't deal with it properly in 2008. Now, I'm not saying I've got any kind of great insight into John McDonnell, although I did interview him once and I found him actually a pretty smart guy, and a decent, honest bloke, sort of person you could have a pint with down the pub. And I think he is also looking at doing root and branch reforms. Remember, he's 100% into nationalising stuff. He's a proper socialist. He thinks if there's a part of the national infrastructure that ain't working, what
he's
we do
deluded,
is
though, Tony. Tony, let me jump in there, because we've got to have a back and forth on this. This is really important.
Sure.
Tony Gosling is our guest. Love the man. His opinions are worth listening to, folks. Agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. This is important stuff. You see, I'll tell you why I don't believe any of this. First of all, they'd be dead long before now if they ever had any intentions of doing that, in my opinion. But secondly, Tone, if McDonnell and Corbyn are serious about the nationalisation programme that they've promised in the event they form the next government, and like yourself, my friend, because our opinions, we've known each other for years, we have the same outlook on life. We believe in justice. We believe in fairness. I think we believe in socialism deep down. I think that's who we are. And I go along with it 100%. Corbyn and McDonnell can't implement this nationalisation programme that I would love more than anything, because they want to basically keep the country in the European Union. And the European Union won't allow it.
Well, we
True,
should
right?
see. I mean, I don't think they do actually. No, I mean, particularly Corbyn. I'm not so sure about McDonnell. Isn't interested really so much in keeping Britain in the EU. There is a very strong strain in the Labour Party right now that understands the dangers of not leaving the EU. right? So that isn't, I'm not just talking about that it means that you don't have any power if you get elected to number 10 if you don't leave. I'm talking about the social consequences. That is to say, the rise of the far right, the potential rise of the Tommy Robinson faction.
Yeah.
If we don't leave, and there are a lot of Labour people that understand this and are really concerned about it, and whatever they might feel about the Socialist International, which is actually what drives many of them, this dream of having some sort of international socialist system that many of them were brought up with in their sort of Marxist upbringing. That's one of the things that really drives them to Brussels. But they are really reacting, I think, against that, understanding that if we do not leave now we voted to leave, that this is just going to be like a red rag to a bull to the far right, and the far right are going to really start to take off, particularly since we've got this kind of mass poverty going on in Britain, with this hidden poverty where people hardly have enough money to put food on the table, have to go to food banks and all that. This is where the far right thrives, and I think there's many Labour people that understand that. So I don't think it's all cut and dried. I mean, this is one of the things that I've learned over the years, Richie, is that the future is up for grabs, and it's not all sealed by the Bilderbergers and people like that. They like to think they have got a fantastic amount of influence. They've got a tremendous amount of wealth, but they can't buy people's souls, and they can't buy the future. All they can do is they can influence it. And if we're stupid enough, if we're badly informed enough, that what they want to happen will happen. But it's a bit of a gambit and a game for them. I mean, even these wars, I think they see as games. We're going for a game here, and they're almost like they're playing a war game when they go down to Syria to try and do X, Y, and Z to have a proxy army or whatever. So I think there's a real possibility that in 2022, whenever this election is, it probably will be that late. I think actually not. The Tories are not going to allow an early election. I very much doubt that. And if Corbyn is still around, and if he still manages, and if he manages to win, we will see some really big changes, particularly bigger because we will by then be outside the European Union.
You deserved the last word, and that was it, Tone. Thanks for that, mate.
Can I say one quick thing?
You
please?
Can. Go ahead, yeah.
About this Lion Air crash in Indonesia today. I looked at the
very new plane, Tony. Very new plane. Is that right?
That's right. Brand new aeroplane. I mean, we're not living in the 1950s with the Comet, where these planes are experimental and they might fall out of the sky. No, we're not. This aircraft is almost impossible for it to crash like this. Any pilot will tell you that if there was some sort of basic problem, he would have been able to put the plane down and safely on the water, and people would have been able to get out on the chutes, etc. So what on earth is going on here? I noticed in an article in the Jakarta Post that they had an audit team from the Foreign Ministry and Environment Ministry of the Indonesian government, and that the guy that runs the airline is actually, or he owns the airline, is actually an ambassador for the government, for goodness sake. So who knows what's going on here? It looks to me as if it might even be a way of getting rid of this audit team who were looking into the Indonesian government. But it certainly should not happen that a plane should crash like this. The pilot, any pilot would normally be able to put an aircraft down if they had some sort of serious failure in a reasonably safe fashion. Almost certainly, looking at this, so it's highly likely that this aircraft has been hacked and brought down deliberately. That's all I'd say.
That's really interesting, Tony. And a former guest on this programme, a very eccentric man, but I think a very brilliant man, Field McConnell, who's flown everything for the US Navy and flown every commercial jet. I'd be very interested to get his take on that. That's fascinating. I didn't consider that at all. I didn't know any of that. You've educated me.
I just looked into who's on board and having one of the main Indonesian government audit teams on board. Well, that's very handy that those guys. I mean, let's not forget who was on board Pan Am Flight 102 at Lockerbie. There was a whole CIA investigation team. A government investigation team that had been looking into CIA drug dealing in the Middle East. I mean, I did articles on the MH17 crash, the Ukrainian Malaysian airliner, and also the MH370, the one that so-called disappeared. Almost certainly was hacked and flown, or maybe using the military, speaking to the pilot to persuade him to fly to Diego Garcia. So that plane didn't disappear. it was just, I think, flown to a US airbase. And there were some people on board the MH370 who had some kind of high-tech military thing that they were talking about they wanted to sell to the Chinese military. And I imagine that the Americans might take an interest in that and say, well, that plane is not going to get to its destination. So I think we have to look at these sorts of slightly unexplained, mysterious crashes and look at the technology that's involved in being able to hack into and control these planes remotely, which is actually a pretty simple thing to do, rather worryingly.
It is indeed, mate. Cheers for coming back on, Tony. You know how much I love having you on, and I know you're very busy, so I appreciate it. The Politics Show, BCFM, thisweek.org.uk. Follow Tony on Twitter as well. I hope you come back real soon, mate. Thanks again.
God bless. Thanks for having us on again, Richie. Cheers.
It's an honour, mate. Cheers. I mean that. Tony Gosling, top man, live from Bristol there. Thisweek.org.uk is where you'll find out more about the Politics Show. If you haven't heard it before, it's a top listen. It really is. That's just about it for the show, which has flown by the way. Phil Restino, friend of mine, has signed in from Florida. How you doing, Phil? Richie, I love Tony Gosling, but there is no one on this planet going to tell Israel to behave or not to do anything. Israel owns everybody, and its tentacles are spread into all parts of power, governments and influence on the planet. Thanks so much for that, Phil. I really appreciate that. Good to hear from you as well. And good to hear from you today as well. It's great to be back with you. If you missed Sunday View, by the way, it's on YouTube and Podomatic from yesterday. Got some great guests lined up for this week. I'll be back with you again tomorrow, Tuesday at 5. I don't have too much time to tell you about who's coming up on the programme this week, but I've got some terrific guests for you. So I do. This programme will be repeating on richieallen.co.uk all the time on a loop, and it'll be available to download real soon on iTunes and of course on podomatic.com, where the programme for 4 years now has been number one in the category of news and politics, with an average, by the way, of 45 to 50,000 downloads a week. We're also on Spotify as well. If you're a Spotify subscriber, look for the Richie Allen Show podcast. It's there on Spotify, right? Alrighty then, that's about it from me. You look after yourselves and one another. We'll do it all again tomorrow, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. I've been Richie Allen. Thanks to Tina Rothery and Tony Gosling. Until tomorrow, bye now.